J. Translation. My Lord, surely I have been solidly cheated by the insurmountable illusory energy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. For, in spite of having obtained your association, which gives liberation from material bondage, I did not seek such liberation. Onto the purport now. An intelligent man should utilize good opportunities. The first opportunity is the human form of life, and the second opportunity is to take birth in a suitable family where there is cultivation of spiritual knowledge. This is rarely obtained. The greatest opportunity is to have the association of a saintly person. Devahuti was conscious that she was born as the daughter of an emperor. She was sufficiently educated and cultured, and at last she got Kardama Muni, a saintly person and a great yogi, as her husband. Still, if she did not get liberation from the entanglement of material energy, then certainly she would be cheated by the insurmountable illusory energy. Actually, the illusory material energy is cheating everyone. People do not know what they are doing when they worship the material energy in the form of goddess Kali or Durga for material boons. They ask, Mother, give me great riches, give me a good wife, give me fame, give me victory. But such devotees of the goddess Maya or Durga do not know that they are being cheated by that goddess. Material achievement is actually no achievement, because as soon as one is illusioned by the material gifts, he becomes more and more entangled, and there is no question of liberation. One should be intelligent enough to know how to utilize material assets for the purpose of spiritual realization. That is called karma yoga or jnana yoga. Whatever we have, we should use as a service to the Supreme Person. It is advised in Bhagavad Gita, Swakarmana cham abhyarcha. One should try to worship the Supreme Personality of Godhead by one's assets. There are many forms of service to the Supreme Lord, and anyone can render service unto Him according to the best of his ability. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Onto Manglacharan now. Om Jnana-timidhandasya Jnana-jana-shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Hena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Gadamayam Dadati Swapadhandikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagujatam Sahagana Vargunatan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvetam Savadutam Parijanasahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Vidamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagatpatit Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namastude Dapta Kanchana Gorangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpata Rubelsha Kripa Sindhu Bhayevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhaya Shivasadi Gaur Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. Once again, welcome to this morning's Bhagavatam class. Today we're reading from a very, very instructive verse, a very important verse, Canto 3, Chapter 23, text number 57. As I mentioned before, this is the last verse in the chapter, Devahuti's Lamentation. And in these last 6 verses, last 7 verses, from 51 to 57, there Devahuti is putting reasons as to why Kurdo Muni should stay. So this is probably the most instructive because it does summarize quite a lot about what Krishna consciousness is. We'll go on to the translation and the purport afterwards. The translation itself, there are 4 key points, line by line. The first point that is made is in the first line, or the second line of the verse, where surely I have been solidly cheated by the insurmountable illusory energy. So here what Devahuti is saying is that she has been cheated by illusory energy. And in the purport, Srila Prabhupada expands on this and says this material energy is a manifestation of Krishna, and also known as Durga Devi, Goddess Kali. Those names are mentioned. The second point is actually the first line of the verse, but in the translation, Prabhupada puts it right after the second line. And there he says that the illusory energy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So this sort of makes it very, very clear that the illusory energy that is around us, that is a manifestation of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. There are a lot of lessons that we can learn from this. I'll obviously touch on that afterwards. The third line, Yatra Vimuktidam Prapya. So what that translates to is in spite of obtaining your association. So Vimuktidam means who gives liberation, and Prapya means having gained. So what Devahuti is saying that from Kurdo Muni's association, she can obtain liberation from this material bondage. The final line is, I think, a line that is probably the most strongest line of this verse, Na Mumukshaya Bandhanat. So Na Mumukshaya means I have not sought liberation. So Na means not, Mukshaya means seeking liberation. So Devahuti is saying, I have not sought liberation. Bandhanat means material bondage. So the last line is that Devahuti is saying that she did not seek that liberation. So bearing that in mind, that will be the structure of today's class. We'll go to every point one by one. At the same time, there are 2 main points explored by Srila Prabhupada that are an extension. The translation obviously says all the 4 points. Srila Prabhupada, interestingly, he highlights the two certain points. The first point he highlights is the use of good opportunities. So for example, Devahuti had the opportunity to get that personal association with Kurdo Muni. So Prabhupada goes into the 3 good fortunes that most, if not all of us actually have. The second point is that the second point is that Srila Prabhupada is saying in the purport that Maya is an insurmountable energy, and it is working under the direction of the Supreme Lord, and it is essentially cheating everyone. So this will also play a part to the structure as well. Without any further ado, we'll start with the first point. Before we do that, Srila Prabhupada does make a very interesting point in the last sort of, not paragraph, but the last few sentences of the purport. Srila Prabhupada explains Karma Yoga and Jnana Yoga. Now, when people hear of material energy, there can be a very popular misconception that material energy, Maya, entanglement, material bondage, means material work. And because of this sort of perception, what actually happens afterwards is that they renounce the material work, but they do that prematurely. Those who, of course, I'm pretty sure everyone has read the Bhagavad Gita between chapters 2 and chapters 6. After the first half of chapter 2, all the way to chapter 6, in those 4.5 chapters, Lord Krishna actually solely focuses on karma yoga. And there, the terminology of nishkama karma is given, where Krishna is explaining that it's not the material work that entangles us, it's our attachment to the results that entangles us. So, keeping this in mind, we'll obviously proceed with the verse, but that was a very important point made by Srila Prabhupada, that the Bhagavad Gita explains that if you put premature renunciation on one side, as in a person leaves all their duties, but still the mind is not controlled, next to doing your prescribed duties but without attachment. What Srila Prabhupada does say is that even if those duties, those prescribed duties, are done imperfectly, still they are much more higher than premature renunciation. Reason is because prescribed duties, doing our duties without attachment, without worrying about the result, that is what essentially purifies us. On the other hand, if you leave material work, as Arjuna was suggesting in the first chapter, as in leave the battlefield and go take sannyas, that Krishna explains is very, very dangerous because that is premature. We haven't purified ourselves yet. And in chapter 3, Krishna obviously explains a very, very beautiful point where it's not essentially, Maya doesn't mean material work, it just means the object of sense gratification. And to explain this, what Krishna does is he gives examples. One example he gives in the third chapter, I think it's the third chapter, around the middle, Krishna gives an example of Janaka Maharaj. Now, Janaka Maharaj, as we know, is a Mahajana. But sometimes we ask ourselves, why is Janaka Maharaj a Mahajana? Yes, obviously, Mother Sita essentially was raised up in his household, but there's another reason to it. And Krishna clarifies that the reason is that Janaka Maharaj performed his duties perfectly. He obviously performed his duty as a king perfectly, but that being said, he didn't become entangled to the results. On the other hand, if you look at something else, you see the demons. There are countless number of demons. Every single demon that is mentioned in the Bhagavatam, those demons were essentially the other way around. They were attached to material results. So this is the perspective that we should have, that being attached to, essentially material bondage means attached to results, essentially sense gratification. So with this in mind, we'll go on to the first point. The first point, as I mentioned before, was the second line, Vantuta Mayaya Dujam. So Vantuta means cheated, Mayaya means the illusory energy, and Dudam means solidly. So here, what Devahuti is saying is that she has been solidly cheated by the illusory energy. Now, this is a very, very important point, because if Devahuti is saying that she is being cheated, what to speak of us? Devahuti, as we know, is she obviously gave birth to Kapila Muni. She was the husband of Kodam Muni, who was probably one of those high exalted Vaishnavas. That being said, though, still she is saying that she has been cheated. What to speak of us? We really don't have much of a chance here. So we need to really dissect what Devahuti means by being cheated. So here, if we go to the journey of self-realization, what Srila Prabhupada writes in chapter 3, there Srila Prabhupada essentially explains how we are all being cheated by the material energy. To say someone is cheated is a very, very strong statement, obviously. You can't go to someone on the street and say, you're being cheated by the illusory energy. But at the same time, it is the fact. If we go all around us, I was reading a book by His Holiness Bhakti Vikas Maharaj. Those who know, he is very, very strong. And what he wrote is, I think it was the first chapter, I think Brahmacharya and Krishna Consciousness, that orange book. He was saying that essentially the illusory energy, essentially all you have to do is just walk on the street and automatically you see people, you see posters, you see advertisements, all linked to the idea of sense gratification. Essentially, it is all around us. And what Bhakti Vikas Maharaj was saying is that the only way to actually free ourselves from that, it is very difficult, is to do Krishna consciousness. Because to do it through self-control, mind control, now there are so many different types of techniques that are out there, it isn't that easy. And eventually, even though we try and do it through, sense control, mind control, we won't really achieve that pure liberation from being entangled. So that was a very nice point we'll go into a bit later. But essentially, in a nutshell, what we need to understand is that the material nature entangles us. Going back to what the journey of self-discovery does mention, in chapter 3, Srila Prabhupada quotes the Prema Vivarta. Now, the Prema Vivarta it's a Bengali verse. Krishna Bahimukha Hana Bhoga Vanchakare Nikatasa Maya Dare Japadiya Dare. So, Srila Prabhupada says that as soon as our original Krishna consciousness becomes polluted with the consciousness of material enjoyment, the idea that I want to lord it over the material nature. So what this essentially means is that originally we are all Krishna conscious. As we come down, essentially the reason that we are entangled in the first place is because we want to lord it over the material nature, or as Prabhupada puts it, lord it over the resources of matter. We want to become the enjoyer, we want to enjoy. And what Srila Prabhupada later says is essentially the answer, the response Prabhupada gives to this is essentially the reason why we're all suffering. There, what Srila Prabhupada is saying is that our troubles begin. Immediately we fall into Maya, illusion. Everyone in the world is thinking, I can enjoy this world to my best capacity. So every single person, as soon as they try and use the resources of matter for their own sense gratification, that is when troubles start to begin. The attachment starts to happen. In Bhagavad Gita, as we know, attachment from attachment, Lord Krishna obviously gives a whole chain: attachment, lust, anger, and then complete madness afterwards. So obviously, it is very, very clear that by being attached to the material energy, that can put us in a very, very difficult situation. Now, what Prabhupada says is that from a tiny ant up to the highest living creature, Brahma, everyone is thinking to become a lord. In your country, many politicians are canvassing to become the president. Why? They want to become some kind of lord. This is illusion. So this essentially is that sort of attachment to that position, that false ego that we essentially, unfortunately do have as part of this material nature. We are attached to that. Now, that is not actually our original constitutional position, but at the same, that is just an illusion. Not an illusion, that is obviously a subtle body, but we are essentially bewildering ourselves by being attached to that, which isn't actually ours. So, as a result, we need to understand that this is where the problems start to happen. To understand this, one needs to go through, in Srimad Bhagavatam, there is the pastime of the demigods and the demons churning the ocean, and eventually the pot of nectar does come out. In that particular pastime, after Dhanvantari comes, and then obviously Mohini comes and bewilders the demons, and the demigods obviously take the nectar, what happens afterwards is sometimes sidelined, it is forgotten. What happens afterwards is that the demons, they were so possessed by that desire to have this nectar, to have this sort of gratification, that they went to the extent of fighting a very ferocious battle. Now, in the Bhagavatam, those who read this battle, you are sure to be, your hands will definitely stand on end. It is a very, very ferocious battle. Essentially, what Vyasadeva and Sutta Goswami does explain, Shukadeva Goswami also explains, that the battle was so ghastly that essentially every single demon that you can think of and every single demigod you could think of, they were fighting against each other. And the Bhagavatam, for a whole chapter or two, it explains, decapitated limbs, everything is very, very ghastly. And it reached a stage where even Krishna and Garuda themselves had to come to the battlefield. So we can see that just because the demons were attached to getting this pot of nectar, they essentially destroyed their entire race. They put themselves into so much disaster, so much calamity, that essentially that led to destruction. So what we need to understand is that this material nature, as soon as we try and run over it, try and pursue over it, that essentially leads to our own downfall. There was a pastime in Ramayana, Valmiki Ramayana, where when Ravana was stationed in the topmost point of his palace, there he saw that from the mountain, Lord Ram started to ascend. And as soon as he saw Lord Ram, before then he obviously saw Hanuman, the monkey army. He saw all of that. But when he saw Lord Ram walk up the mountain, what Valmiki Ramayana does say is that Ravana became so attracted to the power, the strength of Lord Ram. just momentarily. Even in the Bhagavatam, 10th canto, Kaliya is an example. Kaliya, as soon as he saw Krishna, for a fraction of a second, just momentarily, he became attracted to Krishna. Then, unfortunately, what happened is that because these two demons had that attachment to their desires, Ravana wasn't going to give up, Mother Sita, obviously. He still had that attachment towards lusty desires. At the same time, Kaliya, as we know, he was very, very envious. And he was not willing to get rid of this envy, get rid of this false ego. Kaliya wasn't going to get rid of that. So because they weren't ready to renounce from that sort of entanglement, eventually what happens is that obviously destruction happened afterwards. As we know, Ravana's brothers were killed, Ravana's children were killed. Everyone was essentially destroyed. If we look at the Mahabharata, for example, just because of one mistake, sometimes for us it is very, very eye-opening. Just because Duryodhana was so attached to enjoying the kingdom, which wasn't actually his, just because he was so attached, he went through so many extents to try and attain that kingdom. Eventually, what happened is that the whole Kuru dynasty was essentially destroyed completely. The whole Kaurava dynasty was essentially destroyed. Mahabharata explains that from Shantanu's brother, Balika, all the way down to the sons of the Kauravas, every single person was destroyed. So this goes on to show that the material nature is so powerful, it can destroy so powerfully. This illusory energy is insurmountable, it is very solid, to the extent that it cheats us. Now, going on to the purport of this verse, Srila Prabhupada makes a very, very nice point. Srila Prabhupada says that material achievements, they essentially cheat us. We obviously worship Goddess Durga, people worship Goddess Kali as well. But Srila Prabhupada explains that they are being cheated by the material illusory energy by saying, give me great riches, give me a good wife, give me fame, give me victory. Essentially, people try and get these material achievements, they get these material boons from the demigods. What happens afterwards, though, is that even in spite of getting those benedictions, they will still become entangled. Material achievement is actually no achievement. What the purport does say is that as soon as one is illusioned by the material gifts, he becomes more and more entangled, and there is no question of liberation. This is another perspective that I think I discussed in the last class as well. But when we have some sort of when we have some sort of material object, when we have that attachment towards material objects, what happens afterward is that we become more and more entangled. We start to hanker more. No one in this material world is satisfied. If we get something, then we try and hanker for more. And because we just keep trying to hanker and hanker, eventually there is no question of liberation. Ravana, for example, he was the son of a Brahmana. But in spite of hankering for so long to get some sort of material pleasure, he essentially became insane. He became bewildered by his own power. Still, he wasn't satisfied. He still wanted more. So from this, we need to understand that material illusory energy cheats us, not in this, in the sense that material energy makes us spiral more and more into entanglement. So that's one perspective we should definitely maintain. Illusion. So we need to understand what illusion actually means. What illusion means, according to English, is a deceptive appearance or impression. Deception is very important. So Srila Prabhupada, in the purport, very interestingly, Srila Prabhupada focuses on how the material energy, Maya, deceives the living entity. If we look at one example from Srimad Bhagavatam, there's the pastime of Subari Rishi. I won't go into the whole pastime in the interest of time, but he was obviously doing meditation in the Yamuna for thousands and thousands of years. In spite of doing all of that, he just saw some fish exchange in some sort of sense gratification activity. Eventually, that completely bewildered him. And after doing thousands and thousands of years of sacrifice, of tapasya, he came out and he wanted to get married to so many wives. So we can understand that material illusory energy is so powerful that in the sense that it is deceptive. Subari Muni, when he saw, eventually he did see what real happiness would be, But to enjoy our senses, that is not real happiness. That is essentially what the Bhagavad Gita does explain afterwards. Now, if we also go to the purport of Srimad Bhagavatam 5.9.18, that is a pastime of Jadabharat. As we all know, Lord Rishabhadev's son later was Bharat Maharaj. In the next life, Bharat Maharaj was born as a deer. And after being born as a deer, Bharat Maharaj was born as Jadabharat. Now, in chapter 9, this is a particular chapter where there were some dacoits who were worshippers of Goddess Kali. And what happened afterwards? They found Jadabharat. They found him to be mentally insane, essentially. They found him to not be fit, essentially not fit according to material standards. So what they decided to do was they decided to sacrifice Jadabharat, who was a pure devotee, to Goddess Kali. So they offered, and in the purport to 5.9.18, Srila Prabhupada makes a very, very strong point that I'll read the purport. Essentially, what Srila Prabhupada says is, it is evident from this verse that the devotees of Goddess Kali are not at all favored by her. I repeat it again. It is evident from this verse that the devotees of Goddess Kali are not at all favored by her. He goes on to explain, it is Goddess Kali's work to kill and punish the demons. Goddess Kali engages in decapitating many demons, dacoits, and other unwanted elements in society. Now, essentially what Srila Prabhupada is saying is that even though the dacoits, they were devotees of Goddess Kali, they weren't actually favored by Goddess Kali. The reason why is because Goddess Kali, or Mother Durga, or material energy, her main role is to essentially punish the demons, kill the demons, punish us for essentially neglecting Krishna consciousness. In the next line, Srila Prabhupada in the purport says, neglecting Krishna consciousness, foolish people try to satisfy the goddess by offering her many abominable things. But ultimately, when there is little discrepancy in this worship, the goddess punishes the worshipper by taking his life. Now, this is essentially exactly what happened. As we all know, the deity, essentially the deity of Goddess Kali, it essentially split open. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur explains that the radiance of Jadabharat was so strong that it made the deity crack. And Goddess Kali essentially jumped out of the deity and mercilessly decapitated all of her worshippers. So here we can understand that the material energy, this is how we're being cheated. We obviously ask not we as in us, but those human beings, they ask different demigods to get some sort of material pleasure, but at the end of the day, we aren't actually being favored. We aren't being favored by the material energy. That is one very important point. Instead of this, people obviously still blindly worship the demigods, and this obviously leads to more problems afterwards. I'll give one more final example. Srimad Bhagavatam 10th canto, and the Krishna book as well. We know that Kamsa, King Kamsa, he was a very ardent devotee of Durga Devi. He was a very, very strong devotee. That being said, though, if we read the section where Durga Devi actually appears in front of Kamsa, Srila Prabhupada makes the point where even though Kamsa was such an ardent devotee, still Durga Devi came, chastised and threatened to punish Kamsa. Now, this is what we need to understand, is that the demigods, they essentially, their job is to punish. I'll explain why Durga Devi did this in just a second afterwards, but the main point is that the demigods, they are agents of the Lord, but they aren't to be satisfied. Otherwise, that just takes us more and more into material suffering. We'll now go on to the second point, which is that the illusory energy belongs to the Supreme Lord. So in the first line of the verse, Sa means that very person. Aham, I am, Bhagavata, of the Lord. Nunam means surely. So here Devahuti is telling Kardama Muni that the illusory energy essentially, definitely belongs to the Supreme Lord. We need to always keep in mind that the Material energy is nothing else but a possession of the Supreme Lord. It belongs to the Supreme Lord. If we go to Srimad Bhagavatam 2.4.6, Srila Prabhupada writes that the Brahma Samhita affirms that Durga Shakti is working under the direction of Govinda. And without his sanction, the powerful Durga Shakti cannot move even a blade of grass. So essentially, if we go to 5.44, I believe, of Brahma Samhita, the Prabhupada is actually written by His Divine Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. And what he actually explains is that Durga Shakti is working directly under the direction of the Supreme Lord. If we even go to Bhagavad Gita, Maya Dakshina Prakriti Suryate Sacharachaman. Maya Dakshina Prakriti. So essentially Krishna is saying that his material energy, Maya, as in Durga Devi, is essentially controlling this material energy, controlling this material manifestation. And under the Maya Dakshina Prakriti, Suryate Sacharachaman. So essentially that's essentially how the whole universe is being maintained in that way. Now, what we need to also understand is that Durga Devi is a Vaishnavi. She is a devotee of the Supreme Lord. We need to understand that Maya Devi's role is, of course, it is to punish the devotees, but Srila Prabhupada explains that there's a different perspective. What Durga Devi's main role is to test us, to make us suitable to actually reach Krishna's transcendental abode. What that means essentially is that Maya Devi will test us, and the role of her testing us by giving us so many troubles, so many difficulties, is so that we can essentially reach that stage of becoming attached to Krishna, remembering the pastimes of Krishna. And once we remember the pastimes of Krishna, then liberation is essentially guaranteed. Another thing we need to understand is that every single devotee wants to offer the best that they can to Krishna. The last line of this purport, Srila Prabhupada was saying that the devotees will offer to the best of their ability. In the same way, Durga Devi is no different. She wants to offer the best devotees to Krishna. Those who will still maintain some sort of desire or sense gratification or some hankering for those things. Durga Devi also will keep testing and testing and testing until we eventually give up that attachment. And once that attachment is given up, then liberation becomes very, very difficult. Very, very easy, sorry. So in the same way, we need to have the perspective that Durga Devi, under the instruction of Lord Krishna, she provides facility for the devotees to flourish and essentially progress further into Krishna consciousness. Now, Srila Prabhupada does say that it is very difficult to fight with Maya. In Bhagavad Gita 7.14, Krishna does say, Mama Maya Durataya. So this material energy is very difficult to overcome. Just by doing, I don't know what they do now. They do mind control, sense control, different sort of practices. These sort of things, they're essentially material energy is so powerful that they simply won't do. We'll still be entangled by the material energy. So essentially, there is no way we can directly win a fight against Maya. Maya Devi is very, very powerful. She has millions of tricks up her sleeve. She even does have the power of convincing us that we are conquering Maya while we are still fully in her clutches. That is Maya Devi. That being said, though, the main reason for Maya Devi's test is to bring us closer to Krishna. Now, in Srimad Bhagavatam 8.22.29 to 30, in the purport, Srila Prabhupada explained this in a very, very more concise manner. There, what Srila Prabhupada says is the Lord is so kind to his devotee that when severely testing him, the devotee gives him the necessary strength to be tolerant and to continue to remain a glorious devotee. So Krishna, through Maya Devi, will definitely test the devotee. But the reason for these tests is to make us more stronger and more tolerant of the material energy. Now, if we look, I think His Grace Devkinandan Prabhu from Singapore, he made a very, very nice point that whatever we are most attached to, whether that's desire, fame, glory, whatever that may be, whatever we are most attached to, our most strongest desire that we hold on to, that is our weakest point. In the purport to Srimad Bhagavatam, the verse 8.22.29, he says that Krishna essentially, when testing him, he essentially allows the devotee to see their weakest point. And our weakest point is our most strongest desire, what we are most attached to. So obviously, the struggles will come. If Maya Devi doesn't kick us time to time, doesn't really test us, then we have the risk of becoming more attached to those desires. They already are weak points in the sense that they deter us from surrendering unto the Supreme Lord. But essentially these desires that we hold on to, if Maya Devi actually comes and tests us, then eventually we can learn to get rid of those material desires and that attachment. So that is essentially Krishna's kindness. Krishna is obviously, his aim isn't to punish, his aim is to bring us closer to him. So Krishna's kindness is that he tests us so that we can essentially tolerate struggle and then eventually correct our weaknesses as well. For example, Kunti Maharani. In Kunti Maharani Prayers, Canto 1, Chapter 8, Kunti Maharani does say that the Pandavas went through so many different troubles. Even though they went through so many different challenges, they had a battle against some of the biggest generals in the world. They were being poisoned, they were put into a burning house, they were conspired against, they lost everything. In spite of that, Kunti Maharani still asks, in spite of all these challenges, she said she still asks for more challenges, asks for more difficulty. So when Kunti Maharani asks Krishna for more challenges, more difficulties, as devotees, we might ask, why is that so? No one really wants to confront these challenges. But the main reason why that Srila Prabhupada explains in the purport is that by having these challenges, we are forced to remember Krishna more and more. We have to remember Krishna. So this essentially is also Maya Devi's blessing onto us. By giving us that sort of, those conflicts that make us surrendered unto Krishna, we are able to remember Krishna more and more. We have no choice but to surrender to Krishna. If a person is living their life happily, there are no issues, no difficulty, it's very difficult to surrender to the Supreme Lord when you are happy, but it's very easy to do so when you're being distressed. If we look into Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says that 4 types of people go and search for the absolute truth. Now, these 4, one of them is the distressed. Those who are distressed, those who aren't satisfied, those who want more opulence, those who are curious, and those who want transcendental knowledge. Now, Krishna doesn't say those who are happy. Krishna says those who are distressed, or those who want something more. So in the same way, what we need to understand is that what Krishna does is that he essentially gets rid of our desire once we surrender to him when we are fully distressed. So we need to also understand the chain of cause and effect here. Some people can ask, how does thinking of Krishna deliver us from this material world? Essentially, how does Maya deliver us? So in Bhagavad Gita 4.9, we all know that verse, Janma karma te me divyam, evyovati tatvataha. So in the translation, Krishna says that Janma karma te me divyam. So anyone who knows the transcendental nature of my janma, my appearance, and karma, my activities. So anyone who knows essentially the appearance and activities of the Supreme Lord, what happens afterwards? Emyoriyati tattvaha, tyatva deva punarjanma. So tyatva deva punarjanma. So after leaving this material body, they don't have to take another birth. Punarjanma, they don't have to take another birth. And then the final line is that Krishna says that they attain my eternal abode. So this is a chain of cause and effect. Essentially, Maya Devi tests us. After being tested by Maya, we are forced to think about Krishna. Once we think about Krishna, then it's very easy for us to reach the perfect stage. So that chain we'll keep very we'll obviously focus on. The third point is the pure devotees are merciful. So the third point, yat vimuktidam prapya. So in this verse, a devotee says yat, which means because. Tvam Yu, so Yu refers to Kardama Muni. She's saying this verse to Kardama Muni. Vimuktidam means who gives liberation, and Prapya means having attained. So here, what Devahuti is saying is that the pure devotees, they can essentially give liberation to her, to essentially all of us. Now, because Kardama Muni gave Devahuti his association, Devahuti had access to so many opportunities. Srila Prabhupada, in the beginning of the purport, Srila Prabhupada goes through the 3 opportunities that I think most of us, if not all of us, have in this material world. The first one is the human form of life. Now, after 8.4 billion species of life, we have finally actually achieved this human form of life. Now, Krishna said, Srila Prabhupada says that this is our first opportunity in this material world. The second opportunity is that we have Devahuti took birth in a suitable family where there's cultivation of spiritual knowledge. Now, this isn't really limited to birth. My Guru Maharaj has explained that, for example, when a person takes initiation, by the spiritual master or becomes connected to ISKCON, essentially that is where the cultivation of spiritual knowledge actually happens. So every single person linked towards Krishna, linked to ISKCON, to Srila Prabhupada's movement, that is another really, really great opportunity. These opportunities don't come often; they don't come regularly. They are very, very rare. And the third and final greatest opportunity that Srila Prabhupada explains is that Devahuti had the association of a saintly person. So on top of being born in the human form of life, and then on top of being in a suitable family where there is cultivation of spiritual knowledge, Devahuti also had the direct association of a saintly person. This was her greatest opportunity. So out of all these purposes, out of all of these opportunities, Srila Prabhupada says that the association of a pure devotee was the greatest opportunity. Of course, many people are born. We see many people on the streets doing God knows what. There are so many living entities. That being said, though, those who are directly in contact with a pure devotee, that is their greatest fortune. Knowingly or unknowingly, that is their greatest fortune, because that actually allows them to essentially transcend the material nature. Now, what we need to understand is that devotees give us their mercy courselessly. I think we have maybe another 5 minutes left, so I'll quickly try and wrap everything up. A devotee, they essentially give their mercies courselessly. There isn't any sort of reason as to why. I mean, it's not like they're being requested to. If we go to Srimad Bhagavatam, for example, all the pure devotees, the discussions that happen, there's no special RSVP or anything like that. With the, I think, exception maybe the Rajasura sacrifice, where Narada Muni was invited. Apart from that, essentially all the pure devotees, they come unannounced. For example, Suta Goswami, he came unannounced to the Naimisharanya rishis, the Naimisharanya sages. Narada Muni, to Dhruva Maharaj, essentially unannounced he came. Prahlad Maharaj, essentially, I wouldn't say, essentially it's obviously by the will of Krishna, but essentially Narada Muni just happened to intervene when Indra was taking Khayadu, and essentially that was essentially without any sort of RSVP or any sort of invitation. Vidura to Dhritarashtra, despite essentially making his brother very, very upset, essentially letting his oldest son, kick Vidura out of the palace. Regardless, Vidura came to Dhritarashtra being unannounced. So everything is out of causeless mercy. In a nutshell, everything is causeless. The devotees give us their mercy again and again, just out of their causeless mercy. It's not that we ask them to give, they give out of their own will. And because of that, that is our qualification. So many of Srila Prabhupada's disciples, they say that their biggest fortune was coming in contact with Srila Prabhupada. And even though we are all, obviously there are so many people who are born in this material world, it's very difficult to have that association with a pure devotee. There are so many living entities, only a few pure devotees. So that is obviously a very, very big a very, very big opportunity that we all have. If we go to Srimad Bhagavatam 7.9.19, Nrsimhadev actually makes a very, very beautiful point to Prahlad Maharaj. It's probably one of my favorite verses, if I be honest. There, Nrsimhadev says, Yatra yatra chamada bhakta. So yatra yatra means wherever and whenever. Chamada bhakta. So Lord Nrsimhadev is saying where my devotees are. Prashanta Samadarshana. So essentially those devotees, just not any devotee, those who are peaceful and those who are Samadarshana, equipoised. Then Sadhava Samaducharas. So Samada means equally magnanimous. Magnanimous as in they are very, very merciful, they're very great in their mercy. They essentially give mercy to one and all. Samaducharas means equally magnanimous with good qualities. Now, the last line that Nrsimhadev says is te, as in all of them, punyate, purify, even a degraded country or the inhabitants of such a place. So in the translation, Prabhupada makes it a bit more clear. He says, whenever and wherever there are peaceful, equipoised devotees who are well behaved and decorated with all good qualities, that place and the dynasties there, even if condemned, are purified. And Srila Prabhupada in the purport, it is a one-sentence purport, and the only sentence in this purport that Srila Prabhupada writes is wherever exalted devotees stay, not only they and their dynasties, but the entire country is purified. So we need to understand that this is not from any person. This is from Nrsimhadev himself. Nrsimhadev in 7.9.19, he is saying that wherever my devotees are, even if they stay at a place, that place wherever they stay, the whole dynasty becomes purified. Not to speak of the whole dynasty, the whole dynasty is there, but the whole country, Srila Prabhupada expands, and the whole country is purified. Very fortunate, for example, Srila Prabhupada, he obviously came to Sydney quite a few times. And because of that, obviously, we can see Krishna consciousness trying to develop slowly but surely. It is developing, just because Srila Prabhupada's mercy calls us mercy. It's not that we ask for that mercy, but Krishna, the pure devotees, give it to us out of their own. It's not like we are eligible to actually receive. They just give it to us out of their own causeless mercy. Now, another point, last and final point made, is the fourth line, Nam Mokshaya Bandhanat. So, Nam Mokshaya means I have not sought. Bandhanat means from material bondage. So here, Devahuti is saying that I have not sought I have not sought liberation from material bondage. Now, this essentially means that to take advantage of our opportunities, the choice is all of ours. The choice is all ours, essentially. Even though we have taken birth after 8.4 million species of life, we obviously are in the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, and we have access to so many pure devotees. That being said, the choice to actually take advantage is ours. And we've had to go through so much to reach where we are now, to have all these opportunities. However, if we don't try and get a devotee's mercy, that's when the problem actually starts to happen. Our endeavor is what actually matters. We have to try and endeavor to get that devotee's mercy. An example, if you look at the Mahabharata, there are the Kauravas. Now, the Kauravas, they had not one, but three Mahajanas within their family. First one, they had Bhishmadev. Bhishmadev, as you know, he is mentioned as a Mahajana. The second Mahajana they had was Vidura, Yamaraj. Yamaraj is obviously a Mahajana, and Vidura is a incarnation of Yamaraj. And finally, there is also Yudhishthira Maharaj, who was also an incarnation not incarnation, but the son of Dharmaraj. He's Dharmaraj himself. So essentially, despite having all of these pure devotees, what to speak of pure devotees, even Krishna himself was present. Regardless, they still insulted these pure devotees. They insulted Bhishmadev. They insulted Vidura. And because they insulted, they didn't take advantage. Eventually, the whole Kaurava race, as I discussed, was completely vanquished. So this essentially goes on to show that it's essentially up to us to try and surrender to these devotees. Devotees are there. Devotees are everywhere around us, but it's up to us to try and make that effort. Otherwise, if we don't make that effort, then Srila Prabhupada explains that this is the pure test of one's intelligence. We have everything. There is absolutely no reason as to why we should continue becoming entangled in this material world. We have everything to stop us from being entangled. If, regardless of these opportunities, we still become entangled to sense desires, then there's a problem there. There's a big problem, because in spite of having everything, we are still not taking advantage of these opportunities. Now, last and final example, before I conclude, is the pastime of the Dvida gorilla. As we know in Ramayana, Srila Prabhupada explains, there's only 1 or 2 chapters in the 9th canto that describes Ram Leela, but there Srila Prabhupada explains that the Dvida gorilla, Dvida was one of the great ministers of Sugriva. He was one of the main generals in Sugriva's army that went to Lanka and essentially fought against Ravana. Despite of fighting for Lord Krishna, essentially, despite of fighting for Lord Ram personally, he had some very bad association. He didn't, instead of endeavoring to have a devotees association, mind you, in that army there were so many devotees. If you just think about the names, like your hairs start to stand on end. There was Jambavan, for example, Brahma's own son. There was Hanuman, who was a pure devotee as well. So many great devotees were there. There was Lakshmana as well, who was none other than Anantashesh. So many devotees were there. Despite that, still he went and took the association of Narkasura. And because he took that association of Narkasura, eventually he was killed by Lakshmana. And if we look at Narkasura as well, Narkasura had the second opportunity that Srila Prabhupada explains, great parentage. So his mother was Mother Earth, his father was Varahadev. Can you imagine? Mother being the mother, obviously Mother Earth, and then the father being Varahadev. There is no better parentage than having the Supreme Lord as one's own father. Despite that, still, he also had some sort of wrong association, and eventually he had to also be killed. So we need to understand that it is up to us. We can't take devotees for granted. These 2 examples, Dvida and Narkasura, despite of having that sort of opportunity, they took that opportunity for granted. And because they took the opportunity for granted, essentially they became blinded. If we just take association, there is absolutely no reason I would be entangled. And last and final point is being in Krishna consciousness. We are very fortunate to be in Krishna consciousness. We have Srila Prabhupada's own association in so many ways. We have his books. There are so many books that he has written. We have the deities, we have the temple. We have different sort of services we can do. So many services, no shortage of services that one can do within the temple. This is all essentially the biggest opportunity that we have. If we don't take advantage of these opportunities, then there's a big problem there. I was listening to a class given by Myron Maharaj, His Holiness Janananda Goswami Maharaj. He was in Penang. I remember, I think I was there in Penang, and it was, I think, just a few days before his Vyasa Puja. And in that temple in Penang, he gave a very strong class on book distribution. And in the end, he said that book distribution is one thing, to read the books is another thing. Then he asked, there was, I think, maybe 50 or 60 devotees. It's a big temple. Those who've been to Penang will know. There's a very big temple. And there were maybe 50, 60, 70 devotees there. He asked, how many devotees have cover to cover read Bhagavad Gita? Now, some people put up their hands. You would hope people read Bhagavad Gita. So everyone put their hands up. How many people have read cover to cover Srimad Bhagavatam, whole Srimad Bhagavatam? Hands went down. Few people had their hands up. How many people have read cover to cover Chaitanya Charitamrita? even less. How many people have read Prabhupada Unlimited, both volumes? Even less. Prabhupada Letters and Conversations, Prabhupada Lectures, essentially every single book that Prabhupada has written, all of his small books, everything. After going through the whole list, Nectar of Devotion, Sri Upanishad, everything, I think only one devotee had his hand, and it was half raised. What for you? He said, no, I've read, but I've read half of it. So then Gumharaj was saying that, in Shri Krishna consciousness, in ISKCON, we have so many things in front of us. We have so many books. There's no shortage. It's up to us. Simply by just having it there, but not taking advantage. There's so much nectar in these books. Without taking advantage, then it's essentially a waste. On one side, Prabhupada is saying that we've taken, after 8.4 million species of life, we've actually had a human form of life. Somehow or other, our human form of life, we have somehow or other, by Krishna's arrangement, obviously connected with ISKCON. And somehow or other, even then, we have association of devotees. So obviously it's up to us to really use our intelligence and try and take advantage. So the final point, just summarizing, is Devhuti is saying that in spite of having Kadamuni's association, she didn't take that advantage. So just to quickly summarize, we covered 4 different points in all the 4 lines of the translation. First point was that Kardamuni was being cheated by the material energy. Second point is that the material energy belongs to the Supreme Lord. Third point is that in spite of essentially the pure devotees, they give their association cautiously, and with their association we can progress further. And the final point was, even though that we can get liberated from material bondage, most people don't actually seek those opportunities, seek that association. So on that note, I'll conclude here. Thank you very much for listening. I'll go on to questions now. Yes, just very short. I think it's 8:56. We'll just keep it short. Yes. A very good point. Very, very good point. Yes, that I think that pastime of the gopis worshipping, obviously, Katyayani. I did put that in my notes, but I didn't have time to actually go through it. But as you were saying, the gopis of Vrindavana, what they would do is that they would go and they would offer, or do Katyayani Vrata, which is essentially a sort of austerity to please Durga Devi, a form of Durga Devi. But the intention is different. So just going to the point, those who are obviously aspiring devotees, of course, we should definitely respect the demigods. They are obviously expansions of the Lord. Those who have read Bhagavatam, for example, they will know that, for example, just as the Lord has different sort of organs, they constitute those different organs. At the same time, they are essentially serving the Supreme Lord. We should look at these demigods as pure devotees. And our goal shouldn't be to see these people as like a money bank, so to say, as in like, I'll offer you something, you give me this in return. That is what Sri Prabhupada is warning is very, very dangerous. Otherwise, Sri Prabhupada does actually say, I'm just trying to look through, but I've got a reference where Prabhupada has said that the way we should see the The demigods are as pure devotees of the Lord. They do serve the Lord, and we need to see them as servants of the Lord. We should see it more as a way for us to develop in Krishna consciousness. Obviously, we can't offend any Vaishnavas. We shouldn't also worship the demigods with an aim to get material pleasures. That being said, the mercy of the devotees is very, very important, as we discovered. So we obviously need to pray for some sort of strength